The conference awards have come out for all the major conferences, so I thought this would be a good time to get my thoughts on them. I'll start with the Big Ten. Juju getting Big Ten Player of the Year is unsurprising, and I don't have an issue with it. I think if Lauren Betts played better in the 2 games against USC, she would have been the Player of the Year, even if we assume UCLA still loses those games. She's been playing better than Juju in the Big Ten outside of those games, but it's a very tough sell to give someone Player of the Year when a player on an opposing team dominates them twice. I have mixed feelings about Betts being Defensive Player of the Year, not because I think she isn't worthy of it, but because it feels like a cop-out consolation prize. It reminds me of last year when Hidalgo got Defensive Player instead of Player of the Year. Same with Cardoso. Even Nafisa winning Defensive Player of the Year instead of MVP. If you have a player you believe is the best defensive player, and they just are as dominant offensively, it doesn't make sense for them not to get Player of the Year also. I have a weird feeling if Lauren won Player of the Year, Juju would have got Defensive Player of the Year. I've never been a fan of the defensive award being used that way. The all-freshman team is about what you would expect, the only notable omission being Kiyomi McMillan. I imagine that has a lot more to do with her missing almost a whole month of basketball, rather than lack of ability. Whatever is going on, I hope she figures it out. She's too talented to be off the court. The Freshman of the Year award was split between Jelani Cambridge and Olivia Olson. I think Jelani played well enough to be the sole winner of the Freshman of the Year award, but I can't get too mad at Olivia Olson getting some shine. Silas Swords gets all the media attention at Michigan, but Olivia Olson has been scoring with more efficiency and is a noticeably better defender. That duo is going to be absolutely disgusting, especially if they get some help in the front court. It's not the biggest deal, but it's very odd to me that Lauren and Juju were the only unanimous selections for the first team. I don't know how you could make a good faith argument to leave Lucy Olson, Cody McMahon, and both Kikis off of the first team. No issues with the all-defensive team selections. It's exactly the players you would think it would be. But I'll move on to the ACC. Out of all the conferences, I think the ACC by far did the best with their award selections. I was worried that recency bias would take over with Hidalgo's slump and they wouldn't give her Player of the Year. But if you look at the totality of the season, Hannah Hidalgo was clearly the best player in the ACC. I love Latson as a player, but I see way too many comparisons between her and Juju where the defensive side of the ball is completely ignored. Yeah, she's averaging more points on higher efficiency, but the gap between Latson and Hidalgo defensively is much higher than gap between them offensively. Hannah Hidalgo is a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year, while Latson doesn't even receive votes for all defensive teams. It's true she outplayed Hannah Hidalgo, but that had more to do with Hidalgo being in a terrible shooting slump the past several games rather than anything Latson was doing to her. And that logic doesn't really work because Isaiah James outplayed both of them in a head-to-head. And even in the Florida State and Notre Dame game, Michaela Timpson was the best player on either team that day. Speaking of Michaela Timpson, I wouldn't have hated if she got Defensive Player of the Year. She's being criminally underrated both as a college player and WNBA prospect. She's top 5 in blocks in the entire country, and there's plenty of shots she's altered into a miss, but giving it to Hidalgo is far from a robbery. Coach of the Year was pretty easy. It looked like Notre Dame was going to run the table in the conference, but NC State found a way to sneak in and tie their record. I like Zoe Brooks getting the Most Improved Players. There's plenty of players who made massive stat jumps simply by getting more minutes, but she made massive improvements to her game, with only 5 more minutes compared to her freshman season. There was only one real answer for Rookie of the Year, and it was Toby Fournier. She's been Duke's best player and was all ACC first team. With more playing time, she easily would have been an All-American this year. A leading scoring for a team getting less than 20 minutes a game should be considered malpractice. I'm very curious to see what Kara Lawson does in the tournament. They could get away with it during ACC play, but not playing Toby starter-level minutes puts Duke at a decisive disadvantage. But I'll move on to the Big 12. This will be controversial, and I know everyone won't like what I'm about to say, but I have to keep it real. Hailey Van Lith is not the best player in the Big 12. She didn't have the best season either. She had the best narrative. It makes great PR to give the most popular player in your conference the Player of the Year award, who had an amazing comeback story. Don't get me wrong, Hailey Van Lith had an incredible season, and she's a very good player. But there's several players that had a stronger case than she did for this award. She wasn't even the best player on her own team. Sedona Prince averaged the same amount of points as Haley with a much higher field goal percentage while drawing a ridiculous amount of double teams because she's 6'7". Haley Van Lith averaging a career-high assist this year is literally because giving the ball to Sedona was basically an automatic bucket. And defensively, Sedona Prince is one of the best players in the entire country, while Haley Van Lith is a complete defensive liability. It's very obvious Sedona's off-the-court issues played a factor in voting. I don't blame the coaches for this, but at that point, they should have given the award to a player on another team. It makes no sense to give the second-best player of a team an MVP award because someone had off-the-court issues. Haley Van Lith essentially won the Big 12 award because she was surrounded with way more talent than other players. I don't think that's fair at all. Audie Crooks led the Big 12 in scoring, field goal percentage, and was one of the top rebounders. I imagine Iowa State's lack of team success played a role, but in that case, J.J. Quinterly would have made more sense than Haley Van Lith. She was third in the conference in scoring while winning the Defensive Player of the Year award. And unlike Haley, she was clearly the best player on her respective team. She was by far the best two-way player in the conference and one of the best in the country. And Haley definitely wasn't better than Gianna Neepkins. Gianna was top 5 in both scoring and field goal percentage and third in three-point percentage. Haley Van Lith averaged more assists, but that had a lot more to do with Haley having Sedona Prince rather than her being a better playmaker. No one in the Big 12 had to carry their team harder than Gianna did. Utah lost an All-American in Alyssa Peely to the draft. Their coach left mid-season for the LA Sparks, and this team is devoid of talent compared to the other high-level Big 12 teams. You take Haley Van Lith off of TCU, they still could have won the Big 12. At worst, they would have been top 3. You take Gianna off of Utah, they are one of the worst teams in the entire conference. The fact she wasn't even a unanimous first-team All-Selection is a joke. But I'll move on to the SEC. The SEC awards have always been controversial, and this year was no exception. Madison Booker was the SEC Player of the Year, but many people believe Anissa Morrow should have been the Player of the Year instead. Even though her stats aren't the craziest, I do think Madison Booker had a fair argument. She's the best player on a team that's currently ranked number 1 in the country. My issue is the consistency. It makes no sense for Booker to be Player of the Year if Cardoso didn't get it last year. South Carolina went undefeated in the SEC. Cardoso was the best defensive player in the conference, and she was the clear alpha for that South Carolina team. The SEC is a loaded conference with several great teams, so I do think giving the best player on the best team the Player of the Year award is a good metric to use, but if they do that, then they need to be consistent. The award I have the biggest problem with is Coach of the Year. If Vic went undefeated like Dawn did last year, I would felt differently. But what Kenny Brooks did was a lot more impressive. He had to virtually assemble an entirely new team and took a Kentucky team that was third worst in the conference a year ago to making them a top 4 to 5 team in the SEC. Kentucky went from a team that didn't even qualify for the NIT tournament to potentially hosting 2 home games in the NCAA tournament. There was a lot of great players left off the all-SEC team like Chloe Kitts, Rory Harmon, and Camille Pierre. And there's plenty of other players you could also name. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, in a short list of players, there's naturally going to be good players left out. I would rather the SEC keep the same number of all first and second team players than bloat the list like the ACC. 15 first team players is ridiculous and devalues the prestige of the award. If anything, they should have an all-SEC third team. The All-American and all Big 12 lists already do this, so it's not unprecedented. Moving on to the 6th Woman of the Year award, it was obvious it was going to be a South Carolina player. A player from another team getting it would have just been wrong. It's a little weird that Joyce Edwards is first all-SEC team and comes off the bench, but Fulwiley was all-SEC second team and won the 6th Woman of the Year award. Maybe this was an oversight by the SEC coaches, who knows? But that's it for this video. Who do you believe got snubbed from the player awards? Is there anything you would change? I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, thanks for watching.